Dusk or night shots are different than daylight shots in that we can turn on our interior lights as well as having the sun light up our scene. Right now, I've got my scene lit up by a lower afternoon sun, and I've run a quick render to see how it's behaving. My sun is really streaming into that space, and it's still comparatively bright. If I were to turn on interior lights at the moment, they'd be effectively blanked out by the sun. So part of what we deal with in interior rendering when we have that sun in there is the balance between the sun intensity and our interior lights. What I'm going to do is crank that sun over till it's almost at the horizon, and that'll dim it down and get ready for my interiors. I'll select my daylight assembly head, pressing T for top and Z to zoom extents in the scene. I'll pick that daylight, go into the modifier panel and into the setup section, which actually takes me over to the motion tab. I'll put this daylight up to 5:30 in the afternoon, and it gets very, very low and horizontal. Now in my front view, we can see that my daylight is nearly flat, and this will give me a really good reach on those sunbeams. What this also does, and I'll go into my camera view to show this, is deepen the sun color and make it even warmer. Because that sun is controlled by the time and by the physical sky, moving that light in time here in the setup actually changes the color of the light. I'm going to bring it just a little bit forward into the evening, putting it in at 5:45 until it's almost flat, and we're really getting some darkness here in the image. Now I'm going to put in my interior lights, adding in photometric lights into those surface-mounted can fixtures. I'll go into a shaded view, dropping down in the viewport label and choosing Shaded under Realistic. Then I'll go in a top view and into a wireframe by pressing F3 and make my surface-mounted cans photometric lights. The default lights in 3ds Max are photometrics, meaning they think and behave as true light bulbs. This is different from our standard lights, which are arbitrary in intensity and how they fall off, which is closer to a theatrical light. I'll choose Create, Lights, and Photometric, picking a free light. Alternately, you can choose Lighting and Cameras, and there's our photometric light. I'll make a free photometric, zooming in on one of my surface-mounted cans. I'll click in the middle of it and right-click to stop creating. What we see is that if you stay in creation mode and you keep clicking, you'll get more lights. And I've had more than a few of my students say, "Why is my scene blown out?" And I say, "Well, how many lights do you have?" And it turns out by clicking around, they had created a few extra lights in the scene. Now I'll get this light aligned, zooming in and using my Align tool to place it. I'll align it to X, Y, and Z, center and center, and click OK. Now I'll go in a front view, and there's that light. I'll pull this light down, pulling it just out of the bulb geometry, but still inside the can. Although we could actually make a true bulb and light this up, letting the light bounce off the surface of that fixture, that introduces a lot of possible artifacts and shadows, and it's better sometimes to simply pull the light just below that fixture. We really can't tell the difference, and as long as the light looks correct, we'll believe it. Now go to the modifier panel. And in here, I'm going to choose a template, dropping down under Select a Template, and I'll pick a 75-watt bulb. What this does for me is change that bulb's color and the spread of the light over to approximate a generic 75-watt bulb. As an alternate, you could pull in a fluorescent or a street light or something else and really tune this light to a specific light fixture. Now I'll change the type, changing the distribution from uniform spherical to spotlight. I'll get a good cone of light here, and this will give me a good wall wash if the cans are close enough. With this light set to a spotlight, I'll scroll up and look in the light parameters. In the distribution, I'll change the hotspot here to 45 and push the fall off up to 80. This gives me a nice soft spread on the light, with the bright yellow cone showing the hotspot, or where the light is full intensity, and the dimmer yellow cone showing where the light fades off to 0% intensity. This is our diffuse edge, our penumbra in here, where that light softens out. The last thing I'll do with this light is increase the emission area. For this light, although it's set as a spot, it's coming from a single point. I'll scroll up in this menu and into the Shape and Area Shadows section. I'll emit this light from a disk instead, changing that light to emit from a disk of a radius initially of 5.5. I'll bring this down to 2.5, so I've got a 5-inch wide surface this light is coming from, which will give me softer shadows. Now I'll go in a top view and make sure it's sitting nicely in that fixture. It looks like it's sitting well, And this outer white circle is actually inside the fixture, so it's not going to be instantly shadowing off any geometry. I'll name this light, calling it Can Light 01, and then I'll clone it around in the scene. To make this easy to clone, we could either use the Align tool or Snap, using Vertex Snap in our 3D Snap with the axis constraints. I'll use that option, holding Shift and right-clicking and verifying that my snapping is set to vertices and that my Enable Axis Constraints in Snaps is on. I'll press S for Snap, and then click and drag while holding Shift on just that X-axis, pulling that light over and snapping it right onto the fixture, making an instance in this case. I want all the like lights to behave in the same fashion. Now I'll clone it on the Y-axis, up to the next fixture as an instance, and work my way along the bridge. I'll finish cloning these out, and this will take a relatively short time. Once I've got these in, I can clone them down to the first floor as well. I've cloned my lights all the way through the second floor, and now I'm going to clone them down to the first floor. When we're faced with a scene like this that's fairly complex, one of the things we can do is use our viewport selection filter, dropping down under the selection filter and choosing Lights. And now I can only pick light objects. Zooming out and going into a front view, dragging a window around the scene only selects lights for me. Now I'll clone these down, again holding Shift and snapping them down onto the fixtures. I'll instance them and make sure that they're just out of the geometry. I'll also hit the spacebar for selection lock, press S to turn off the snap, and pull them up just a little bit. There's one light I need to move here, one can that's offset. I'll pick this last light, press S for snap, and snap it, aligning it onto that last fixture. With it cloned and an accidental copy deleted, I'm ready to test this out. Remember, when you're lighting, make sure you get all of your lights in before you render. It's fairly impossible to judge the quality of a render with only some of the lights in, as we're not getting the full contribution. Once we have all the lights in, then we can start rendering, saving valuable time and getting everything ready first.